20 episodes? You promised me cocaine. And now, two guys who survived a survival podcast for 20 episodes, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 20 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
In today's episode, Ron Davis is back with 5 medical myths your mama might have told you. You are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Howdy, Ron, and welcome back to In the Rabbit Hole. It's fantastic to have you again.
It's good to be back.
You've brought us some medical myths based on something stupid I said in a podcast a while back.
Yeah, you mentioned something, and I thought, why is he doing that? You mentioned you were talking about storing stuff, and you mentioned that you were storing hydrogen peroxide.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why is he storing hydrogen peroxide? And I bet I know why he's storing hydrogen peroxide. So when I met you, I was like, so why are you storing hydrogen peroxide? And then I started wondering, how much hydrogen peroxide, being, a prepper, how much do you have?
Fortunately, I am going to say it's probably a lot more than I would ever need, but it's nothing crazy. It's only like maybe 4 liters or
maybe 10 gallons.
10 gallons.
Yeah, maybe a little more. Enough to run a car, random cars. Of course, as you pointed out to us, it's enough to take an awful lot of blood off of an awful lot of clothing.
Yes. And that was one of the things. And actually, this myth was something I didn't really know either. I didn't really think you used hydrogen peroxide to clean wounds per se, but I didn't think there was any reason not to. And then an email went out from the medical director of the service I work with, and he said, the only thing we use hydrogen peroxide for on the ambulance is to clean blood out of clothing and not to put it on wounds. And if you think about it, the reason it works so well on getting blood out of clothing as opposed to other things trying to get blood out of clothing is because blood clots and binds itself to the fabric, and then it's hard for other things to get in there and break it up. But hydrogen peroxide does a great job of breaking down clots. That's why if you ever cleaned blood with hydrogen peroxide and it gets it foams up and it's really kind of a dramatic thing.
That's why I always thought, man, hydrogen peroxide is the stuff, because it's like killing everything.
It's kind of neat when you pour it on a wound.
Yeah. And so, but the problem is it's like blowing away your clot. It's blowing away good flesh. Bacteria too, bad flesh. But so it's not really intended to be used to clean wounds. But it is something that everybody kind of thinks. It seems like every group of people seem to have like their thing they use to clean everything with, and hydrogen peroxide is just one of those.
I guess it beats using Windex.
Well, there are people that Windex clears everything. That's one of those. What am I missing a movie reference? I
think it is. Yes,
I know there's a movie reference there. And then I was thinking, in a shit hits the fan kind of situation, where you're obviously storing gallons of hydrogen peroxide for. Maybe it kills zombies. It would probably be pretty good for zombies.
That's how you dissolve the zombie bodies.
That would work.
You got to clean that stuff up somehow.
That seems like it would make a mess.
Well, in that kind of situation, whatever you're going to use to clean wounds or to disinfect with, you're going to have to be able to make. And I was like, I have no idea how you make hydrogen peroxide.
Yeah, I've got to say, I don't know how you make hydrogen peroxide. I have a very good foundation for how you make alcohol. And I do want to point out to everyone listening, don't try to make your own alcohol. At least don't tell anybody if you are, because you'd be breaking a number of federal laws that actually have existed since Prohibition. And it is still illegal in the United States to have a home distillery that is unlicensed. So don't do it.
And you don't want another reason for the ATF to be worried about you as a prepper.
Exactly.
Because the
we
ATF...
have plenty already.
Yeah. The ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms should be the name of a store, not a federal agency.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that.
I think I shop there.
I wonder if you can do all three. There's got to be laws against alcohol and
I'll
firearms.
bet you can. I'll bet there really is.
There's if now I don't know if this is still true, but last time I was in Phoenix, you could actually walk into a store, buy a firearm, do your banking, and buy your liquor.
I remember seeing that store, but they had to separate it where like there was a turnstile between the liquor section and the firearm. So technically it was two separate stores or something weird like that.
But it was awesome. It was like bullets, banking, and booze. I love it.
Huh. It's like a dream location.
Yeah, so anyway, don't use hydrogen peroxide to clean wounds. Alcohol works, but obviously you're going to have to endure some pain. There are a lot of other disinfectants.
Like Bactine and stuff
yeah,
like that.
and
Betadine.
That's what I'm thinking of. Because I think I read...
but that turns everything orange.
Yeah, it does. But I think I actually read something online once on how you can make betadine. This is Ron. I'm known to be famous for being betadine. That's it, betadine. That you can actually make that from stuff that you can find.
You know, speaking of things you can make at home for wounds, butter on burns. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I've heard the myth before.
Yeah, that was one that I got from my co-host for Questions of an EMS Newbie, and he said that people put butter or margarine on burns all the time, and
but you taste so good after that.
You taste so good. It's not popcorn, people. The thing with this is it doesn't do you any good. That's one thing. When you have a burn, what you've essentially done is opened up a big part of one of the best parts of your immune system, which is your skin, that keeps things out. And now you're going to go take and put a fat on it that can go rancid and holds things together, and it's just clean it.
Jeffrey Dahmer started this rumor.
That is probably what it is.
You know, you really have to wonder where some of these things originated from, but
some crazy can.
I think butter is actually the most bizarre I had ever come across.
Yeah, and treating burns it's an interesting situation because you've got generally a bigger wound with a burn, and it's the same rules. You want to keep bad stuff out, and so the basic treatment for wounds is just to dress them and go to the hospital. And there's a breaking point between whether you use a wet dressing and a dry dressing. You can use damp dressings if it's less than 10% of the person's body, but if it's more than 10%, then don't do that, because then you start getting into this situation where you're worried about hypothermia. They're going to start freezing. I mean, have you ever had like a full body sunburn?
I've had a big sunburn.
Yeah,
it was not comfortable, and you feel
and
really
you
cold.
You get cold real easy, and that's just a sunburn is 1st degree burns, and those are your lightest. Just think about what if it's actually a serious burn, and one of the things that burns does is it burns off a lot of fluid. And then it uses a lot of fluid to kind of try and keep that flesh going. So that's the number one thing we worry about is, it's the number 2 thing. The number 1 thing we worry about is if you have burns on your face and it getting to your airway. But the number 2 thing is that you're going to start getting cold. You're going to get dehydrated.
Huh.
So those are the actual treatments for burns.
Not butter.
Not butter.
Now, what about Crisco?
Depends on how you want to flavor that burn.
Yeah. The only time you should put any of those things on something that's burned is if you plan to eat it.
Good to know.
For those of you that read Emergency, the walking refrigerator.
Yes.
I'm going to leave that there.
Yes. So a defibrillator.
Yes.
Tell us about defibrillators.
This is the one that gets EMS and medical people just on TV. You see it all the time. Drives people up the wall. You see it all the time. Person has a heart attack. You look at the monitor, and it's just a flat line. And they grab the defibrillator, which is the 2 pads. And I was thinking this the other day. I saw a show with 2 pads. I'm like, do they even make them like that anymore? I bet they don't even make the pads anymore, because now you stick 2 pads on their chest. And they'd stick them on there, and the person would jump, and then boom, the heart would start beating again because they're jump starting their heart. They'll even say that we're going to jump start their heart. Well, defibrillators do exactly the opposite of that. They stop your heart from beating. There are lots of, when you're having a heart attack, there are lots of things that actually could be your heart attack. One is that your cardiac muscle just died, and that's why you have flat line and ain't nothing coming back. You're dead. We call that asystole, and that is an extremely stable rhythm. Not probably going to change.
The most stable.
Yes, the most stable rhythm. Normally, the ones that people come back from are VFib, which is ventricular fibrillation, which actually means your heart is like quivering. It's not doing anything. It's enough to pump blood, but it's kind of what's happening is your heart's electrical
Like a
thing
little
is
mini
starting
heart seizure kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like a heart seizure. That's a good way to put it, because your heart has electrical cells in it, and they're all that way, and any of them can start firing it if they're not doing it in an organized manner, and that's what's happening. So what you want to do is you want to tell them to stop. So how do you do that? You shock them.
You're hitting the reset key.
Yeah, and then you watch the monitor, and you hope their heart starts beating again. We actually have there's a chemical version of that, adenosine, and they slam it, they hit it, push it in really fast, stops your heart, and everybody sits there and waits. One. Hoping that when it wears, because it's a chemical, so it has a little time it has to wear off, that your beat start back up again. And so when you see that on TV, you're just like, that's asystole, man. You're not going to shock that. And then they shock it, and they're like, I jump started his heart. No, you stopped his heart again. And so, yeah, that's just one of those things when you start knowing something and you're watching TV and you're like...
Kind of like tactical magic hands.
Tactical magic hands, yes.
Yeah, yes. or
teacupping. That's the one that drives me crazy.
Yeah.
I see people holding their, there's a big 24 poster with Kiefer Sutherland, standing with his handgun, and he's got the bottom of the grip on the palm of his hand. I'm like, really? How many seasons of this did you do? Did you not go get any freaking training at all?
Yeah.
We talked a minute ago about your airway and that with burns being that the thing we're worried about. Another thing, a myth that people have, is that you can swallow your tongue, especially if someone's having a seizure. And this is another myth that is related, is that people start having a seizure and they start wanting to stick stuff in their people's mouths. They want to stick a spoon in there. That's the one that kept coming up with my friends. They stick a spoon in their mouth. They're having a seizure. And, they're having a big grand mal seizure and they want to stick stuff in there. And actually, I went and looked it up in my EMT basic book, and they're like, yes, you may come to a seizure and people have stuck things in the person's mouth. And the truth is that what we do is back to ABCs, which I mentioned in the last show: airway, breathing, circulation. Sticking stuff in there is blocking the airway, people. You want to open up that airway. So don't go sticking things in there. Now, swallowing your tongue, you can't swallow your tongue. Not attached that way. It can't go backwards. I mean, really, how much of the end of your tongue is not attached to the bottom of your mouth?
Well, unless you're Gene Simmons.
Unless you're Gene Simmons, which he might be able to do. But, so you're not really swallowing your tongue. Your tongue is the most likely thing to block your airway. If you go unconscious, that muscle that is your tongue relaxes, and if your head's back, it's going to fall backwards, and
so it just kind of slides.
Yeah,
and
it just kind of
back into your throat.
Yeah, relaxes back, and it's all head position too, because the number one thing you do to fix it is you just align that airway. You straighten up their head, kind of put them in the sniffing position for kids and adults. You just want it. You want their mouth to open and their head. You want to see that air is going in and out. And that's what you do for seizing people, too. The fact is, there's not anything... I mean, it's not anything we're going to do for seizing people. We're going to wait. And normally, when someone in an ambulance gets there, the seizure's over. And then the person's in what they call post-ticular state, which just means they're just flaccid, floppy. All their muscles are relaxed because they've been clenched up, and now it's done, and they're relaxed, and they're confused and all that stuff. And so you just wait for that situation. And don't go sticking stuff in their mouth. If you think they aren't breathing, and they actually may not be breathing during their seizure, that's a common thing because your muscles are all flexed up. Just keep their head, make sure they're not banging themselves on stuff if you can. But really, you don't even want to try and restrain them very much because there's not really much that can be done.
So speaking of the tongues getting in the way thing, the other one that I always hear is in an allergic reaction, the tongue's going to swell up. And is it the tongue or is the throat swelling up?
It's all of them.
Is it all of it?
Yeah. I mean, an allergic reaction or anaphylaxis, it's the swelling of the airway that causes the problem. And if that would include your airways include actually your nose, your mouth, throat, bronchi, all the parts of your lungs as well. And all of those things start swelling up and closing off.
Okay.
And that's the main thing you worry about with allergic reaction. And the main treatment for that is epinephrine, actually. And most people who have an allergy and know they have it have an auto-injector, and that's what's in it, adrenaline. That's the thing you're worried about, is that up and close that airway.
So speaking of breathing passages,
Uh-huh.
okay, so someone's having a heart attack. You hear you need to help them breathe.
Yeah, well, that we talked about that a little last week too. In CPR, and this is it's a myth, but it's not one that's like old, because the American Heart Association taught this until like last year, is that if you need to be doing rescue breaths every time someone gets CPR, you need to be breathing for them. And as we talked about last week, was it last week? I keep saying that. Last time. As we talked about last time, the most important thing is getting that blood moving around. And the best way to do that is chest compressions. Get on those chest compressions immediately, and don't worry about breathing for them. Call 911. Push on their chest until somebody gets there. And shocks them.
Jump starts their heart.
Yeah. Well, and another thing is, if you're going to have a heart attack, have it at Walmart. Because Walmart has an AED. And AEDs are made for people who don't know what they're doing. So they have instructions. You stick.
They're really neat, and the fancy ones will talk to you and everything.
Oh, and they're becoming pretty. I guess the prices are coming down a lot because my in-laws actually have one in their house.
Wow.
Now my father-in-law's had a heart attack, so I mean it's.
Yeah, and they actually implant them in people.
Yeah.
They'll have an implant.
We've been considering putting one in our office. My father has had a heart attack a long time ago, and I'm amazed he's not had another one. But they're like, I think you can get at least like the same model that I trained with at the Red Cross. I want to say they're $300. Wow. We'll put it in the show notes with a link to it. But they've gotten really cheap, and I think the talking model was just like an extra $100. And that one was great. It was, you pull it out of its case and you push a button and it starts talking. It said, okay, so now remove the pads and now remove the stick tape, and now put this one here and put this one here, and now everybody get back and push the button.
Now, of course, I'm going to throw in something that we throw in a lot of shows, which is you can get one of these things, but go to the Red Cross and get trained. Because having one in your house, staring at it, and thinking you know how to use it is not a good idea, because as we just heard, if someone's heart is stopped, you don't necessarily want to pull one of these things out and use it.
Actually, you do. You're going to go ahead, and that's one of the things the AED does, is it actually reads that rhythm,
right?
And then it'll say shock advised or shock not advised.
Okay.
If it reads that and they're asystole, it's going to say no shock advised, continue CPR. Because that's not one of the rhythms that it shocks.
There you go.
But it knows. It knows what it's doing. And
it's smarter than you are.
And there's actually one that the two pads connect, and in the middle, there's they kind of unfold, and there's a little square in the middle that goes right where you do CPR, and it has a little light on it, and the light blinks so that it's telling you how to do your CPR.
Oh,
that's great.
What your rhythm is, too. Oh. So, it'll walk you through the whole thing. That's why. And bigger stores now have them, that's why I said if you're going to have a heart attack, have it at Walmart, because I know all Walmarts have one.
I was watching something, and for the life of me, I've been sitting here trying to remember what it was while we've been talking, and I can't, but I was watching a program, and they were talking about better than Walmart even is any of the casinos in Las Vegas.
Yeah, because they're going to see it faster, too.
Yeah, they've got all the security cameras watching, and they were having such a problem with it that they now have, small... Are they EMS crews or paramedic crews?
My understanding is they actually have EMS people who work for them. I don't know. That's an interesting, because I've only heard rumors, although I'm going to Vegas for an EMS conference, so I'll find out.
Yeah.
But they do have people that will respond. Because they have security all out the wazoo, too, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
And I'm sure
those
guys are
like
CPR
little
too.
cities.
Yeah.
So.
And but they do have to call, they call advanced people, so
Well, let's move on to what's probably the most pervasive medical myth within the survival community, which is sticking tampons where they don't belong.
I don't. Well, I was gonna say I'm not really sure I want to stick them where they do belong, much less where they don't. That's one you see is if that is bullet wounds. because a bullet wound's going to be the exact right size for you to stick a tampon in there. Well, the entrance wound might, but I doubt the exit wound's going to be. And we were trained, don't go sticking things into wounds. Once again, you don't want to stick things in there just because you don't want to trap stuff in there. You want to stop bleeding. You want to apply pressure, but that doesn't involve sticking things inside the wound. In general, the wounds in a bullet hole, that kind of thing, you're going to put a big dressing on the front, you put a big dressing on the back, and you're going to apply pressure, and you're going to hope it stops bleeding. And if it's an extremity wound, it doesn't stop bleeding, you're going to apply a tourniquet. Which is actually another medical myth. Apply a tourniquet, you're not going to lose your limb. Don't apply it to the neck. It's an extremity. Your head is not an extremity in this case. But, it's that. The only time I've heard anything about actually sticking into a wound is in the case of a bullet wound, and that's if you can look in the wound and see the artery. You can see the artery pulsing out blood. You can actually stick your gloved finger in there and apply pressure directly to the artery. Make it stop and hopefully clot. But don't go sticking in. You actually gave me a source to read right before this, and he had a good point. It's like it's a pain to remove it. Even if it works, even if you stick it in there and it stops their bleeding, now when they get to the hospital, they got to take the thing out.
Yeah, this thing that's clotted into
the system. Yeah, it's clotted in there. They'll be pouring hydrogen peroxide on it. I don't know what they'll be doing.
Well, I got 10 gallons they can borrow.
Yeah, so you've got to pull that out, and, that's just going to open the wounds back up again. But, of course, that's true of most bandages. But that's the deal with bleeding is you have to balance what will kill them slower. But, Pam, don't stick things in there. Actually, I went backwards in the book you handed me, and he was suggesting maxi pads before tampons. And in a sense, he's right. All a maxi pad is a big bandage.
Yeah.
It's a big bandage, and you can wrap a dressing around it, and it's made to absorb blood. So, that would work. But it's not really any different than a regular bandage.
And you're probably better off using some kind of a bandage with a clotting agent in it.
Yeah, that would
Something
be best.
Intended
obviously.
for the actual purpose of.
Yeah. And the other thing is, a maxi pad is not made to stop bleeding. Made to absorb blood.
Right.
And so there may be differences there.
Yeah.
And it's what they're made out of paper, really? I mean, in a sense, I don't think they're made out of cloth in general. I don't know.
I guess the
So we got three guys sitting around, we have no idea.
I'm going to guess the concept being that they're sterile.
They are sterile.
Yeah.
That's it. That would be a positive thing, yeah. And they're easy to come by.
Yeah.
And, you might have someone standing right there with one if you didn't have a first aid.
True.
Yeah.
So, that's, don't go sticking things in wounds. Don't go sticking a hot poker in there either. That's bad. I don't care how many times you saw it in the Westerns. Don't go cauterizing wounds.
Oh, man. But I always thought, like, you take out your Bic lighter, or what was it Rambo did? And pour gunpowder in the wound and light the gunpowder.
I've heard the gunpowder thing, too, that has some kind of disinfecting effect.
Yeah, it blows off that part of the body.
Now, of course, all this stuff goes out the window if, it's the last-ditch effort of surviving. I mean, I was just watching an episode of one of those I shouldn't have survived, or I wasn't supposed to live, or whatever the name of the show was. And apparently the guy actually did cauterize a very long wound with a butane lighter. Now, again, if you are in a position where that is your last possible means of surviving, by all means, try it out.
I mean, that's if that's the only thing you have to stop bleeding, that's good. Go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
But dude, if you'd have wrapped something around the top of that arm and cut off that circulation for a while, maybe you wouldn't have had to do that.
Yeah, I think the issue was he was on Mount Rainier and he cut his arm open, and it was an issue of, do I use clothing to stay warm or to tie off the limb?
Yeah, and I mentioned this off mic last time, that a cut, if you get a clean cut across an artery that goes perpendicular to the artery will block off almost immediately. So Kill Bill, completely wrong.
Which I'm very disappointed in.
I was going to bring that up. That was a really interesting thing that I'd never known. I think even we never really talked about it in CERD or Red Cross or any of that until you brought it up. So why does that happen exactly?
Well, if you think about it, what an artery does, it has a muscle around it, and it alternates sections of that muscle, push the blood forward, and they squeeze shut, then the next one opens up, and that pushes the blood, and then it squeezes shut and keeps it running one direction, pushes it on through the system. So all that's happening. Well, if you cut across that, then it's going to go squeeze, and it's just going to sit there because the other side's not reacting, and it's going to stay squeezed shut. Now, the opposite problem is if you get a longitudinal line, so if you want to go down an artery, now you got that muscle that's going to squeeze, but it's not circular anymore. So it's essentially going to pull everything open, and you're going to get a worse bleed if it's along the line. But if it's across, if someone uses their circular saw and chops their foot off, they're not really going to bleed a huge amount. Well, it's going to look like a lot of blood, and they're going to think it's a lot of blood, and there's going to be a lot of blood. Okay, let's not say, but they're not. They may even it'll probably be controllable by direct pressure. You won't even have to do it. But what we see, like in Iraq with IEDs, where you get like your leg blown off, but it's like this horrible hamburger wound. Well, now you've got longitudinal stuff, you got all this stuff
every which direction.
And you're just going to start bleeding.
But if it's clean cut,
yeah,
Kill Bill.
Well, that was in the Kill Bill. Okay, the other thing was I actually asked my doctor friend after I saw that. I says, "Is there really that much pressure?" Because when she would chop people's heads off, the blood would just like spurt up like 4 or 5 feet all over the ceiling and everything else.
Like 110 psi.
Yeah. Is there really that much pressure in your system? And he was like, "No, not only is there that much pressure, but your artery would probably block it off pretty quick too. Nice clean cut like that." So those were the medical myths that I had for you. So do you guys have any myths that you guys know about you want to ask questions on? I can't guarantee I'll answer, but...
Well, in the movies, the tough guy always pulls the knife or whatever random object has been shoved into him out.
Yeah, don't do that. The rule is, unless it's an airway problem, which, once again, we come back to ABCs, unless it's an airway problem, you just secure it in place.
A good rule of thumb might be, if there's nothing there, don't stick something in. And if there is something there, don't yank it out.
That's right, yeah. But if you think about it, if you have, someone stabs you in the chest, let's just go with stab you in the chest, and your heart doesn't stop beating, because if your heart stops beating, well, now we've got a CPR issue. I can't do CPR on your chest with the knife sticking in it, and I will take the knife out. But if someone sticks it and you go to the hospital, they're going to do an MRI, not an MRI. That would be really bad. That would take the knife right out.
That would be rather comical, but probably
yeah, but they'll do an X-ray or a CT, and they'll see where it's at, because they don't want to remove it, and it's like wrapped around your aorta or something, like rips it in half coming out, and you're like, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that. Yeah, so don't pull things out. Secure them in place. Matter of fact, I think you said they taught you to use duct tape, but whatever, a bandage to make it not move around. Because the same thing applies. If you have a knife in there and it wiggles up and down all the way to the hospital, that would be bad.
Or even if you have something stuck in your eye.
Yeah. And in your eye, here's an interesting one about having something stuck in your eye. Cover both eyes. Because your eyes track together.
Oh, yeah.
So if you leave, you have a fish hook in one eye. And those are still the pictures in my book that, most times you're like, EMT guys are like, that's awesome. But the fish hook in the eye thing still bugs me. But if you have the fish hook in there and you've stabilized it, and then this eye starts going back and, it's like, what's going on, guys? Looking back and forth, you're going to have problems.
Ah, yes. Problem with stereo vision.
Yeah, so go ahead and explain to whoever you're doing it. Look, I'm going to close your other eye because your eyes track together, and I don't want you making the one eye move when you move the other eye, but cover both eyes.
That makes a lot of sense. That does make a lot of sense. So there's another one that I think there was a popular survival show where he's done it, and I know I've read plenty of articles where people do it. Drinking your own urine when you can't find water.
Okay, they didn't cover this in EMS class, so I'll just be talking out of my survivalist rear end. On the positive side, unless you have an infection, urine is in fact sterile. So you're normally you could drink urine without getting. I was gonna say without getting sick, but I think if I drink urine, I'd probably vomit. Yeah. That would be bad. But my understanding is it takes just as much fluid to process that urine as you get out of it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the snow argument.
Yeah.
Of you can use snow to hydrate, but the amount of water you require to heat the snow to water within your body may be more than you're taking in. So you end up
And
in
the
a
thing
bad
too
place.
is if like this isn't the urine you had when you were fully hydrated either.
Mhm.
You're just like, I know in an hour I'm stuck out in the desert. I know in like about 5 hours I'm gonna need this, so I'm just gonna go ahead and save it. That might work better, but it's like, oh man, I haven't had any water. I haven't drank any water in a day and a half. I need to pee. I'm gonna drink that. Well, that's like, that's the bare minimum amount of water your body was willing to give up, and all the other stuff it wanted out. It's like, I wanted that out. Why do you put that back in? It's gonna make you vomit. Now you've used up more fluid because you vomited. Because vomiting's bad when you're dehydrated too.
Yeah, I would imagine that wouldn't be too good for your system, losing more
Yeah.
stuff. Mm.
So, I mean, once again, that's not covered in EMS, but some people believe it has positive medical effects to drink.
Yeah. Now, we were having a discussion. I'm posing this to the audience. We had a discussion offline about water bottles on concrete. Now, I know this isn't a medical question, but the three of us we've all read that you're not supposed to store water bottles on concrete. Hey, we've all read it. None of us do it. I think we all actually, the better safe than sorry method is the way we've gone. But I'm going to ask the audience if anybody has a study, anybody.
A legitimate
study. Yes, please.
From a legitimate source.
Right, not one you did in your own basement. Unless you are an MIT scientist and you're listening to the show.
Or if you just have some really good chemical analysis
Right,
stuff.
if you got
I'm good with that if you can show me
exactly.
why I should believe
Yeah.
you.
But if you are the MIT scientist, PhD, or you have some great chemical analysis stuff, call us, because we'd like to do a whole show with you. But if somebody out there knows where there is a study or detailed information that isn't just somebody saying don't do this,
Right.
please send it to us, post it in the comments somewhere, get it to us, because we would really like to have that information, because it's something we've been talking about. We don't like to do things for no reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think every single survival website says don't do it.
Yeah.
And they talk about that the plastic will leach the chemical into the water.
Right.
But nobody says what the chemical is that's being leached out.
Right.
And what the process is that's taking place. And nobody can point to a legitimate
Exactly.
Or
study where
even
somebody
an
did it.
example of I stored water for
And I got
5
sick.
years
Yeah.
and I got lead poisoning from my concrete. Because
Right.
a lot of the places your water is before you drink it is concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like concrete inherently is bad for water. I don't know what the exact thing is. I put a quote actually on the Confessions blog because I kept quoting this doctor from a presentation he did on tourniquets, and his quote was, when you don't know what something is, go read up on it. And if you're reading and there isn't a little superscript at the end of the sentence, do you know what that means? That means some old guy made it up.
That's awesome. I'm going to use that.
Sitting in a bar waiting on an airplane.
Awesome.
And, he just made that up because thought good. I mean, because a lot of times we think of things and we're like, that urine thing, that sounds good.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like
it's-
fluid and I need fluid. That'll work.
That's the same thing we
Yeah.
talk about with statistics, and I always like to. I change the number every time, but it's like 93.7% of all statistics are made up on the spot.
And it's my son who's studying actuarial science was giving me this whole discussion about p-values when he came home last time. I'm like, I think that has to do with drinking.
Exactly. I think it does. And that's where we've regressed now.
Yes. Yes. Ron, thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
We always love having you on. And your website again for the listeners is?
EMSnewbie.com.
Awesome. Thank you again. And that wraps up episode 20. Thank you for joining us today. If you like the podcast, make sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us. And if you didn't, well, be sure to tell us about it using the feedback form on the website. Tell us what you didn't like about the show and what we can do to improve. Be sure to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter by visiting the newsletter page. By connecting with us, you receive updates about the site and notifications of new articles and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted to the site, intherabbithole.com, that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each and every episode where we invite you, the listener, to comment on the show and interact with us and each other. Till next time, stay safe and sound.